And Brennan, we're live, man. How are you this week?
I'm doing pretty good. Yeah. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, man, good to meet you. I'm glad we were able to connect last week. We talked for a little bit, and I was like, man, we got to get Brennan on here. As I was looking more into your background and your work, and it's fascinating. And I wanted to kind of give you the proper intro here for those that don't know you, or maybe they've read some of your work but don't realize it's you. I wanted just to share, and you've got this on your LinkedIn, but man, it just tells about how much cool work you've been a part of. But Brennan, over the last decade, you've written articles on science, business, crime that have appeared in National Geographic, Outside, Scientific American, Smithsonian, Bloomberg Business Week, and several other outlets. You're a former Alicia Patterson Fellow and have received awards from the American Society of Journalists and Authors, the Association of Healthcare Journalists, and the Society of Environmental Journalists. And in 2018, you were part of a team that won the George Polk Award for environmental reporting. Before you started doing writing and editing full time, you spent several years conducting biological research in the rainforests of Panama and Costa Rica and published more than a dozen scientific papers on frogs, snakes, and insects. Man, I've been to Costa Rica, so when I saw that, I was like, all right, cool. That's a great place. Every time I meet someone that's spent time there, I'm like, man, Costa Rica is awesome. I would live
D-
there.
Did you see any snakes?
You know? Yeah, actually, I did see some snakes.
Tell.
I did a study abroad there, spent time in San Jose and Monteverde, and then, weekends got to go to, is it Arenal, where the volcano is, and all of that stuff. So got to see monkeys and exotic birds and animals. I did see a snake. I saw a snake eating a rat, actually. So it was interesting.
Fantastic. That's quite exciting.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was one of the lucky ones that got to see some action.
I hope you got some good photos or video of that.
I do. I do actually. I can always share them with you. No, Brennan, you've done some interesting things, man. You've been writing for a long time. What got you, I guess, going down this path of going, and obviously research into one aspect, and now, really writing your second book that's been published.
Yeah. So I mean, what got me down the path of journalism and writing? Yeah. So growing up, I grew up in Texas, and I loved to write stories when I was little. I think when I was like 10 years old, I wrote like a time travel, novel. It's terrible, but it kind of, I just love creating things. I did claymation, and then I got into science, and I just got obsessed with like catching snakes and frogs. There was like a bayou in our backyard. And I would go down there and I'd actually like shoot little videos and all this kind of stuff. And this was like in the is when like video digital technology was not as good as it is now. But I just I knew I wanted to create things, and I started off like getting deeper into science and starting to write scientific papers. And I was kind of like down that path towards getting a PhD when I just had this crisis, and I was like, you know what, I love this stuff, but I felt like I was getting narrower and narrower, and I wanted to be broader and broader. And I wanted to find a new way to like bring adventure into my life, going to places and telling stories. And I said, wait a second, I've been reading magazines my whole life. I made a skateboard magazine when I was a kid. Why don't I try to be a freelance journalist? And I bailed out of, well, I did get my degree, but then I never sort of pursued a career in academics. Instead, I started pitching magazines. And I started off writing mostly about science because number one, they actually paid well. Writing's not a great living, but there was actually like, science, which is like a journal, Nature, Scientific American, and there's just, this whole universe of publications that I could, get hit the ground running with. And then I started broadening and like looking at all of those quirky different things I was interested in, crime stories, adventure stories. I was a correspondent for Outside Magazine for about 10 years. And my first book was about the Operation Warp Speed and the coronavirus vaccine race, which was a real trip to work on. And in this project, I wouldn't quite call it a book. I don't want to let people down. It's 20,000 words. So compared to my first book, which was 100,000, what it is it's like a 2-hour read, something you can take on the airplane, something you can read in a day. and it's just this incredible story of the rock band Boston and their fight against the record industry.
Yeah, well, I was about to say you balanced out both books, 100,000, 20,000. Equals 2 books, right? 2 normal sized books. And yeah, so I mean, so Power Soak, how did you come across the story? It just like what was your process of investigating and getting all the details and information and putting this together? Because I mean, again, you were kind of talking about how you have different interests and follow different things, but like how did this specific story did you find out about it and then start going down the rabbit hole to put it all together?
Well, as it happens, you're from Atlanta. You told me a moment ago, and I actually have a buddy out in Atlanta. He's a cinematographer, makes documentaries and films, and he's really into the music industry. And he told me, one day he was flipping through like this, I think it was like an encyclopedia of music, and there was like a paragraph entry about, you know, the rock band Boston, and its lead singer was this engineer genius, Tom Scholes. And there was this gap. They had, their first album was like the best-selling album of all time, best-selling debut album. It's got this, More Than a Feeling on it, and Rock and Roll Band, and just all these classics. I mean, you listen to that album, it is a, classic rock standby. And then, that's 1976, and they released a second album in 78, and then they vanished for like 8 years. And now it's like people don't really know, they don't really think about them that much. What happened during that 8 year period? Well, they were in just this epic fight with the record label. And my buddy told me this story, and I said, huh, I wonder, if anybody's ever told it before. And I looked around and I saw, a few little pieces about it, but not with this kind of like the narrative that I like to sink my teeth into. So I saw an opportunity there.
Yeah. Man, that's interesting. That's fascinating because there just to hear something that's intriguing and then go be able to figure like as a writer to find something that no one else has really told the story about. I'm sure you were like, "Oh yeah, this one's mine."
Yeah, well, I mean, the first thought was like when I learn about something like this, because I'm always looking for stories. If any of your listeners have a good story, please send them my way. I'm desperate for it. But the first thought is like, this is a great story. There's these great characters. I knew there was like this volatile head of the record label. I knew there was like this rock band. I could like picture all of the scenes, but I didn't know if the material existed, right? I knew, I wasn't sure I was going to get the interviews I needed. And it's, this is a story, this took place 40 years ago. Like, how can I tell this in the kind of detail I need? And so my first step was like, can I get any documents? I'm kind of an investigative journalist, or not kind of, I mostly do investigative journalism. And I started searching around and was able to obtain like, 10,000 plus pages of like depositions, court testimony, original CBS records. And suddenly I was like, wow, there is a way to put this whole thing together.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
and without, like, telling the whole story, because obviously you want people to pick it up and read through it, give kind of the high level facts about what took place. Because in this day and time, we've seen, like, recent Taylor Swift buying her music back. Like, we've seen different type of record things, but, like, music industry is so different now too, where you can put things out there and for people to see. You don't the record labels, is different, but, like, what was the main issue with Boston and this lawsuit that was going on?
Yeah, I mean, it was sort of a bunch of things colliding at once. So number one, I mean, I mentioned the guy who founded Boston, Tom Scholes. He's this engineer. He's a perfectionist. The first album, it took him 6 years to produce before he had a record deal, right? So he was tweaking it and doing all that while he's sending out demos, and he had sort of his way of working. But once he got the deal, he was supposed to produce, believe it or not, an album, almost two albums a year,
Mm,
for the next 5 years. It was crazy. And so that's like one thing if you're just this pop band cranking out the hits, but like a guy like this was just not workable. So that was going on. And after his second album, he felt, he was kind of pressured to put that one out before it was ready. And then on top of that, he had a conflict within the band, and he had conflict with his manager because this initial record contract he signed was absolutely terrible. I mean, you hear about these bad deals, but I mean, this manager was like sucking off, like the records I saw was about half of recording royalties went to the manager, which is very unusual. The typical deal, it's about 15 to 20%. In this case, half of the royalties were going to this guy. And then Tom, he split all of his royalties 5 ways among the 5 other band members. So he was getting like, couple $100,000 when the manager's making millions.
Yeah.
Then the record label is like, you need to deliver this album. And Tom is like feeling this huge amount of pressure, so he starts to slow down, and eventually it comes to a head because this was a period, also the late 70s, early 80s, when the record industry was in crisis. The economy here was in tailspin, and people weren't buying albums as often. And CBS Records, which was his label, was like, we need another blockbuster to save our butts. And so they kept pushing on Tom, and finally, they ended up cutting off his recording royalties completely. And then he was making so much money that they had like a special deferral account, and then they weren't allowing him access to that either. So he basically said, "I'm not going to work on this album anymore." And that led to a $20 million lawsuit, and that kind of sets the stage for Power Soak.
Yeah. Yeah. Gosh, that's interesting. I find all stories like these fascinating, just the behind the scenes workings of people and I don't know, the shadiness that can take place like this, like one of the biggest bands ever during that time. I mean, of all, we're still listening to the music, but to see like such a tragedy of a situation for them to go through, and I never knew this, I don't know if most people do. I've never heard this story before, so it's extremely just very interesting. When you were gathering all the information, what's that process look like as far as, like, how do you know where to go? How do you go about getting the conversations that you need to have to get this? Like, how do you get the documents needed? What does all that look like when putting this together?
Yeah, I mean, my first step was to see what kind of public records existed. I knew that there was this $20 million lawsuit, and I started searching. It was in federal court. It was in Manhattan. And I called New York, and it turned out, records that are that old, they end up at the National Archives. I mean, in fact, the records from this initial lawsuit did not exist anymore. CBS versus Boston, they had destroyed those because it's a civil case and they didn't keep cases from that era. So initially, I thought this is a dead end. I'm not going to be able to pull this thing off. But then I learned that there was that initial case. And then afterwards, the lawyer who had filed the case for Tom Scholes ended up suing CBS separately. Why did he do that? Because CBS had sued him during that lawsuit, which was like just a totally crazy thing to do, to sue the lawyer of the defendant. And actually, the judge was super angry about that. I have like a transcript from that hearing where the judge is like, you know, basically chastises CBS for doing that. But basically, CBS was angry that the lawyer took Tom Scholz's third album and sold it to another record company, MCA. But anyways, among this heap of records, as you can imagine, they're accumulating. So then this guy, he sues CBS and said that was, it caused him all sorts of anguish. And so some of the records from the original lawsuit end up in that lawsuit, and I was able to get those.
Yeah,
And
thankfully, they went that
that
way
was
so
a
you could
haul.
yeah,
And that
yeah.
was like, I had no idea. I flew out to New York wondering, am I going to open up these records and find nothing
Mhm.
of interest? It's just going to be all technical, but it wasn't. I found good stuff there. And then further on, um, I did track down some of the participants and folks. I mean, one guy had some of depositions in a storage unit. Depositions are not usually public.
Mhm.
They're not filed with the court case. And so getting them was a gold mine. I got some depositions from another guy who had saved them. So in 2 cases, I got some stuff that was no longer, wouldn't have been available to me. And that was, I mean, it's just, it's so exciting when you get stuff like that. I remember like flying home on the airplane and like reading through it line by line and taking notes and just being like, oh yeah.
Yeah. Were you able to talk with any I don't know, I know it's been such a long time ago, but, like, how close to the sources of everyone involved were you able to get just from a conversation standpoint? Like, any, I don't know, family members, anyone that would have any information that they'd be willing to share?
Yeah, I mean, I make an effort to talk to everybody who's involved in the story and everybody who might know anything. And so certainly I approached the founder of Boston, Tom Scholes, who, he's talked about the case before in the past, but he was not he considered it kind of like a tough time for him emotionally. He didn't want to revisit it, so he declined to participate. But I did talk to other folks. And I mean, that's how I ended up finding some of these depositions and things like that. But I mean, the funny thing is, as an investigative journalist, it's oftentimes like the, you know, the documents tell the story sometimes better than somebody would in person. Like 40 years time has passed. But I have records that say
Dang.
I had this conversation on December 2nd, 1983
Yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's kind of more important to me, honestly.
Yeah. Dang, that's incredible. How long did it take you to gather all, like, from inception of idea to putting this out there? How long did you spend on putting this together?
Yeah, I mean, it's been about a year-long process. I've done other work in the meantime. This was kind of like my sort of project I'm most excited about for the year. I heard about this case in maybe December of last year. Started making moves to get the records in the early part of the year, and then finally, like I flew out to New York and Boston to do my reporting on the ground. And then it's just been a matter of writing and revising and revising and revising. I mean, I wrote so many drafts of this thing, and yeah. So
Yeah. That's incredible. I'm just, because I don't write, and so, like, it just sounds like so much work that goes into being able to go you have the idea, you have the story, but now you have to go get the information and seek it out and go all over, go find the records, and then put all your thoughts and information on, into your own work, edit, get that all published, and then out there for everyone to read. So for me, and again, this is what you do. So you're a pro and you know how this process works. I'm over here like, this must have taken you years.
yeah, yeah.
No, it's interesting. When you, I guess within this story, and I'm kind of curious because I'm kind of going to take this in a different direction of like, you said you've worked on different projects. I mean, are you, do you have other stories you're working on currently that you'll be releasing? My other question kind of tied to that is like, while investigating this, are there any like side stories that grabbed you that you're thinking about like going in that direction? Like other, I don't know, other music bands during that time. I mean, there were so many stories from that era of music. Like, is that an area you plan to explore more, or I don't know, what's your next work look like?
Yeah, I mean, this was kind of a departure for me. This is my only piece of music journalism. I wouldn't, and yes, digging into it, I definitely looked around to see what other stories were out there. And I mean, like, there's stories about, like, Pink Floyd working on The Wall. I mean, there's a lot. I looked into the Monkees, which was this band that was created for a TV show, and then, I mean, there's just all this crazy stuff that happened in their history. I don't know that I'll pursue any of those. Again, it's sort of a factor of, like, where, there's a good story, but is there, like, all the material you need? And so, you have to invest a lot to figure that out, and
Yeah.
sometimes you end up empty-handed.
Yeah.
I have been sort of publishing some side stories related to this Boston thing, things that I didn't, you know, feel fit into the final, version of it, which I put on my Substack and will be publishing up over the next few weeks. And yeah, I don't have any limits in terms of what I'll look into. I've got other stories in the, tech space, science, crime, but yeah, I'd always be open to another music story. This was fun.
Yeah. It's cool that you have so many interests and you have the ability to go explore and take the time to look, dig deep and to be able to put something together. It's just cool. I think, I don't how many people are exploring. There's been a lot of obviously books and stories that have come out about bands and people of that era and entertainment, but like yeah, I don't know. As we get further and further away, there's probably less and less written, and people look less and less at that time. And so having someone like yourself like bring up a kind of a new story about it, it just seems interesting. And maybe there's other stories out there, kind of like this one that, either you at some point or somebody will be able to explore and write about. And it's just for someone like me, it just takes me back to learning about an era of this, this music. I mean, my parents listened to this, and I remember listening to this music growing up. But digging deeper into it now, there's a different, I don't know, appreciation for it, I guess sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, going back to your point, I mean, how many of these stories are just gonna be lost to history? If I hadn't come around and obtained those records, this next batch of records might have gotten destroyed at some point, and
Yeah.
then this whole thing would have been lost.
Yeah. Never would have been told. Yeah.
Yeah, and, and I think that, as just I mean, not to get too in the inside baseball, but, telling stories like this is not easy. This is not something that, most magazines are gonna publish. I had to take a risk and fund this out of my own pocket and
Yeah.
publish it on my own. I knew I didn't wanna write, like, a whole book about Boston.
Yeah.
I'm sort of more of like, there's a lot of music books out there that are encyclopedic. It's like every single thing that happened, every show, every this, every that. And I didn't have that kind of passion for it. For me, it was like the conflict and the characters, and I just wanted to give people something that was like a juicy, 2 to 3 hour read, to get into that world. And
Yeah.
I'd love to do something like that again. But yeah, I mean, there's so many other good books and projects like that. Actually, I was kind of inspired. I don't know if you saw that movie Air about the Air Jordan sneakers.
Yeah, great with, Matt Damon and yeah, oh, yeah, Ben Affleck. Dude, that movie is awesome.
Yeah, I mean that I thought that movie was great, and like here it is, this time capsule from this period, and it's so much fun to watch. And I kind of had that in my head when I was working on this. From my understanding, though, is like that movie is like almost completely a fiction. Like just like the basic concept is true, but there was no research behind it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I hope if anybody ever makes a movie based on the Boston story, they'll use my book as the source material.
Use your book. Yeah, you got me thinking like Phil Knight, Nike book was awesome, and then like, yeah, the MJ story, it's like this told as like a myth, legend, type of mind-blowing thing. But that's how movies are made, I guess. They've gotta do it that way. But,
Yeah.
no, well, Brendan, man, this is so cool. Again, just like learning more about you and just all your work and like how many I don't know, you talk to people I talk to people a lot and they kind of and you seemed like you were going down that road and you stopped, but like they kind of pigeonhole themselves and they work on one thing or one subject and write about one thing and one subject for their entire career and they stick to one thing. You've branched out. I mean, you've been in the rainforest, you're writing about Boston, the coronavirus, you've done a lot of different things, and so it's gonna be I don't know, now that we've met, it's gonna be super interesting to follow your work from here on out and just to see what projects you decide to tackle next and what you dive into.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I wanna see what I tackle next.
Yeah,
This is the moment in my, day-to-day life where I hit, the crisis. It's like one project comes out that I've been thinking about for all this time, and then I'm kind of in a hole, until I find something that I'm really excited about.
yeah,
And I am in that place. I have some short articles I'm working on, but I'm always looking for that next big idea.
big story.
And, my girlfriend hates me when I'm in this period because I'm in a mood.
You've got nothing to, like, take your time up.
What's that?
You have nothing to, like, spend your time on. You're just trying to figure it out.
Yeah, yeah, nothing to spend my time on or just, self-flagellating, like, "Why don't I have any more ideas? That
Yeah,
other guy, he comes up with, like, 5 good ideas a year, and I only have
yeah.
1."
Well, no, well,
So
yours is a good one. And Brendan, I've got one more question for you because I ask everyone who comes on the podcast this exact question. And obviously, you're a big writer, a big reader. But what's a book or two that you've read that has had either a personal or professional impact on your life and career? And if I were to ask, or anyone were to ask, hey, Brendan, what's a good book that you like to recommend to others? What do you like to bring up?
gosh, what is a book that, I just well, one book I'm looking on my bookshelf and I'm like, which I've got a lot of books, but the book that I was just that I really, really think is a fun book, it's an old one that maybe your listeners will like. It's called Chasing the Sea by Tom Bishel, and it's kind of like a travel memoir. I mean, he's an incredible writer, very literary writer. And this is like when he, I think it's his first book. when he travels to, I don't know if you're familiar with the Aral Sea in Asia. It's this vast, dried out inland sea. And he goes on this journey to get there. And it's just got incredibly moving moments, sad moments, and also hilarious moments. And so if you're at all interested in going to an exotic place, I can't think of a better guide than Tom Bishel.
Cool. Cool. Yeah, that sounds interesting. That's a book I probably wouldn't pick up unless someone recommended it to me because I haven't looked into that too deeply, but it sounds fascinating, and I'll certainly add that to my. I'm always curious to what people are reading. Again, you're really Brendan. Actually, you're the first like true journalist that I've had on this podcast. I mean, obviously you've written a couple of books now, but just someone with a different background than who I've talked to, and so again, I always ask that question because I'm curious to know, like, I don't know, what books or authors have inspired different people, or what are people interested in right now and whatnot. And so that certainly sounds like a good book I need to add to my list to read. I love getting lost, in like different places I've never been, and thinking about it that way. And so that would be a good one for me.
Yeah, I highly recommend it. Yeah, I mean, I love really good travel journalism.
Yeah. No, that's great, man. Well, Brennan, I've got your book on the website. I'll get your other one on here too, The First Shots. And
Yeah.
I'll get that on there for anyone who's interested. And man, as you continue to work and put more out there, we'll have to do this again. And man, the more books you write, the more I'll spotlight them and get those out there for you as well. But man, I know for a fact, I'm thinking of like 3 people I know who watch and listen to this that's gonna be interested in Power Soak because they listen to this music. I mean, we go to the lake and we play Boston and all this stuff, so I know they're gonna be very fascinated with our conversation. But, man, good luck on your future ideas and future work, and I can't wait to follow you and, see what all you come up with.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Chris. This has been a lot of fun.